I never expected to be the only one at my mother's funeral. Standing there in that empty church hall, the silence was deafening. No cousins, no old family friends, not even my two sons, Mark and Christopher, who lived just 3 hours away. At 58, I found myself completely alone, watching the simple pine casket that held the woman who had given me life. Mom and I had a complicated relationship. She was always stern, always expecting more from me than I could deliver. But in her final years, after Dad passed, we'd grown closer. I'd call her every Sunday without fail, and twice a year I'd drive the 8 hours to visit her in the small town where I grew up. During those visits, she'd soften a bit, showing glimpses of the warm mother I'd always wanted. "She's ready now, Mr. Davidson," the funeral director said quietly, his hand on my shoulder. I nodded, unable to speak. The emptiness of the room echoed my emptiness inside. I'd sent messages to both my sons. Mark, my oldest at 32, had responded with a brief text. "Sorry, Dad, can't make it. Big presentation at work. Call you later." Christopher, 29, hadn't bothered to respond at all. My ex-wife, Elaine, had actually sent flowers, which was more than I expected after our bitter divorce 10 years ago. As they lowered my mother into the ground, I thought about how she'd always bragged about her grandsons to her friends. She kept every school photo, every Christmas card, displayed proudly on her refrigerator. Yet here at her final goodbye, those same grandsons couldn't spare a day to honor her. Back at my mother's small house, I sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of her life. Photo albums, trinkets, the collection of ceramic cats she'd amassed over decades. Her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had called me the day before, asking to meet in 3 days' time to discuss her will. I hadn't expected much. The house was small and not in great shape, and I knew she'd been living on Social Security and what little was left of Dad's pension. I stayed in her house that night, sleeping in my childhood bedroom that still had my high school football trophies on the shelf. The room felt smaller than I remembered, the walls closing in with memories. I tossed and turned, thinking about my sons, wondering where I'd gone wrong as a father. The next morning, I called Mark. He answered on the 4th ring, the sound of an office bustling in the background. "Hey, Dad, sorry about yesterday. How did it go?" His voice sounded distracted, like he was typing while talking to me. "It was just me, Mark. Not a single other person showed up." I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "That's rough, but Grandma didn't really keep in touch with anyone, right?" "She kept in touch with you," I said quietly. "She sent you birthday cards every year, Christmas presents. She called you on your wedding anniversary." There was a pause. "Look, Dad, I'm really swamped right now. We'll catch up soon, okay? Maybe we can grab lunch next month when I'm in town for that conference." Next month. My mother was being buried, and my son was talking about maybe seeing me next month. After hanging up, I tried Christopher. It went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message telling him the funeral was over, not mentioning his absence. What was the point? I spent the next 2 days sorting through Mom's belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. It was physically exhausting, but emotionally even more draining. Every object held a memory. Every drawer revealed another piece of the puzzle that was my mother's life. On the 3rd day, I met with Mr. Peterson. He was an old-school lawyer, complete with bow tie and suspenders, who had handled my parents' affairs for decades. "Harold," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "I'm sorry about your mother. Dorothy was a remarkable woman." "Thank you," I replied, taking a seat in his wood-paneled office. It smelled of leather and old books. "Now, regarding your mother's estate," he continued, opening a folder, "she made some very specific provisions in her will that I'm obligated to explain to you." I nodded, expecting to hear about the house and whatever small savings she might have had. "First, there's the mountain cabin in Blue Ridge." I blinked in surprise. "Mountain cabin? What mountain cabin?" Mr. Peterson looked up, equally surprised. "Your mother never mentioned it to you?" She purchased it about 5 years ago. It's quite a lovely property, about 3 acres, with the cabin situated on a ridge overlooking the valley. Beautiful views. My mind was reeling. My mother, who had always been so frugal, who darned socks and reused aluminum foil, had bought a mountain cabin without telling me. "There's more," Mr. Peterson continued. "The cabin is part of a larger estate that I'm afraid I can't fully disclose to you yet, as per your mother's instructions." "What do you mean you can't disclose it? I'm her only child. Who else would she leave things to?" "Your mother's will has specific conditions," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "The full details of her estate will be revealed 1 week from today at the cabin itself. She requested that you, along with your sons Mark and Christopher, be present for the reading of certain portions of her will." I felt a mixture of confusion and frustration. My sons barely made time for her funeral. What makes you think they'll come to this reading? Mr. Peterson reached into his drawer and pulled out 3 envelopes. "Your mother anticipated that concern. She asked me to give these to you. 1 for you and 1 for each of your sons. She was quite specific that they should receive these in person, from your hand, not through mail or electronically." I took the envelopes, feeling their weight. Each had a name written on the front in my mother's neat, precise handwriting. "What's in them?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Dorothy sealed them herself. All I know is that she was very adamant about the procedure. The 3 of you must be at the cabin next Friday at 2 p.m. I'll be there as well to execute the final provisions of her will." I left the lawyer's office with more questions than answers. Back at Mum's house, I sat in her favorite chair and opened the envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in her familiar script. "Harold, my son. There are things you don't know, things I should have told you years ago. The cabin holds the truth. Bring your boys. It's time they understood what family really means. Love always, Mom." I read the note several times, but it revealed nothing concrete. What truth? What didn't I know? And how was I going to convince my sons to drop everything and come to a mountain cabin for the mysterious reading of their grandmother's will? The next day I drove to Atlanta, where both my sons lived. Mark worked for a large consulting firm downtown, in one of those glass skyscrapers that always made me feel small. I'd called ahead, and he reluctantly agreed to meet me for coffee in the building's lobby. "Dad," he said, standing up from a small table as I approached. He gave me a quick, awkward hug. "I only have about 20 minutes. We've got a client meeting at 11. "This won't take long," I assured him, sitting down. Mark looked like his mother. Same sharp blue eyes, same confident posture. He was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "How was the funeral?" he asked, at least having the decency to look a bit ashamed. "Empty," I said simply, "but that's not why I'm here." I pulled out the envelope with his name on it. "This is from your grandmother. She left specific instructions that I give it to you in person." Mark took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. "What is it?" "I don't know. Mine just had a cryptic note about going to a cabin she apparently owned. Did you know she had a mountain cabin?" He shook his head, looking genuinely surprised. "Grandma, no way. She was always so, careful with money." That's what I thought too. But according to her lawyer, she bought it 5 years ago, and she wants you, me, and your brother to be there next Friday for the reading of her will. Mark was already shaking his head before I finished speaking. "Dad, I can't just drop everything and go to some cabin. I have meetings scheduled all week. The Brockman account is at a critical stage." "Mark, this is your grandmother's final request. Surely your job can spare you for 1 day." He sighed, checking his watch. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't promise anything." I looked at my son, successful, handsome, completely disconnected from anything that didn't advance his career. "Open the envelope," I said quietly. "Now?" Yes, now. I want to see what she wrote to you." With obvious reluctance, Mark opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. As he read, his expression changed from impatience to confusion. "What does it say?" I asked. He handed me the note. In my mother's handwriting it said, "Mark, when you were 7, you fell from the apple tree in my backyard and broke your arm. While we sat in the emergency room, you told me you were afraid your father would be angry with you. I promised you then that love doesn't depend on perfection. I've left you something at the cabin to remind you of that promise, but you have to come in person to receive it. Next Friday, 2 p.m. No representatives, no excuses. With all my love." Grandma. Mark took the note back, reading it again. "How did she know?" he whispered. "Know what?" He looked at me, something vulnerable in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. That I needed to hear this now. This week, I mean. I waited, but he didn't elaborate. He folded the note carefully and put it back in the envelope, then into his inside jacket pocket. "I'll be there," he said finally. "I'll reschedule whatever I need to." Finding Christopher proved more difficult. He worked as a freelance photographer, which meant no office, no regular hours. I tried calling again, but still got voicemail. Finally, I went to the small studio apartment he rented in a trendy part of town. I knocked several times with no answer. Just as I was about to leave, the door opened. Christopher stood there, looking like he'd just woken up, hair disheveled, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. "Dad?" He seemed genuinely surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" "I've been trying to reach you for days, Christopher. Your grandmother's funeral was 3 days ago." He ran a hand through his hair, looking away. "Yeah, I saw your calls. I couldn't deal with it, you know, funerals and all that. Can I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider. His apartment was cluttered but creative. Photography equipment everywhere, prints hanging on walls, books stacked in corners. It smelled faintly of takeout food and coffee. "I'm sorry about Grandma," he said as I sat down on the edge of his sofa, "and I'm sorry I didn't call you back." There was something in his voice, a rawness that made me look at him more closely. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale. "Are you okay, Christopher?" He shrugged, looking away again. "Just busy, working on a project." I didn't push. Instead, I took out the envelope. "Your grandmother left this for you. She was very specific that I had to give it to you in person." Like his brother, Christopher seemed surprised. He took the envelope, examining his name written in my mother's hand. "What is it?" "Read it and find out." He opened it slowly, unfolding the paper inside. As he read, tears welled in his eyes. Without a word, he handed it to me. "Christopher, of all my grandchildren, you were the one who saw the world as I wished I could have, through an artist's eyes. Remember when you were 14 and showed me your first real photographs? I told you they were beautiful and you said, 'No, Grandma, they're true.' Truth and beauty aren't so different, my dear boy. Come to the cabin next Friday at 2 p.m. I've left something there that I think you'll find both beautiful and true. All my love." Grandma. Christopher wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I can't believe she remembered that conversation. It was just one afternoon years ago. "She remembered everything about you boys," I said quietly. "Every visit, every phone call. She kept all your school photos on her refrigerator until the day she died." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then, "Where is this cabin?" "I didn't know Grandma had a cabin." None of us did, apparently. "It's in Blue Ridge. Her lawyer says we all need to be there next Friday at 2 for the reading of her will. There's something she wanted all 3 of us to hear together." "I'll be there," Christopher said immediately, no hesitation like his brother had shown. "Do you want me to drive up with you?" The offer surprised me. "That would be nice," I said. "We could leave Thursday afternoon, stay overnight." For the first time in our conversation, Christopher smiled. Like those fishing trips we used to take, remember? When Mark and I were kids. I smiled back, a warmth spreading in my chest. Exactly like that. The drive to Blue Ridge with Christopher was easier than I expected. We fell into a comfortable rhythm of conversation and silence, the awkwardness of recent years melting away as the miles passed. He told me about his photography work, his dreams of publishing a book of portraits, his recent breakup with a girlfriend I hadn't even known existed. "I should have called more," I said as we wound through the mountain roads. "Me too," he admitted. "After you and Mom split, I guess I didn't know how to have just one parent at a time. It was easier to have neither." The honesty stung, but I appreciated it. "Your grandmother always said I was bad at talking about important things. Guess she was right." Christopher smiled a little. "She also said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew. Said you just kept it too well hidden." That surprised me. "She said that?" He nodded. "Last Christmas, when I called her instead of coming to visit. She wasn't even mad at me for not showing up, just told me stories about you as a kid." We followed the directions Mr. Peterson had provided, turning onto increasingly narrow mountain roads until we reached a gravel driveway that curved up through dense pines. When we finally emerged into a clearing, we both fell silent. The cabin was beautiful, not the rustic shack I'd imagined, but a well-built home with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Behind it, the land fell away into a spectacular view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, rolling waves of green and blue stretching to the horizon. "Wow," Christopher whispered. "Grandma had good taste." We parked beside a sleek black SUV that I recognized as Mark's. He emerged from the cabin as we got out of the car, raising a hand in greeting. "You beat us here?" I called to him. "Got in last night," he replied. "Wanted to check the place out." "It's something else, isn't it?" We joined him on the porch, the three of us standing awkwardly, unsure of the protocol for this strange reunion. "Anyone hungry?" Mark finally asked. "I picked up groceries in town. Thought I could grill some steaks for lunch before the lawyer shows up." "That sounds great," I said, genuinely pleased at the gesture. Inside, the cabin was just as impressive as its exterior, open and airy, with large windows framing the mountain views. The furnishings were simple but high quality, nothing flashy but everything well made. It felt like my mother, I realized. Practical, understated, built to last. While Mark prepared the food, Christopher and I explored the cabin. 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, a fully equipped kitchen, a stone fireplace dominating the living room, and everywhere, touches that could only have been my mother's. Hand-crocheted throw blankets, landscape paintings from local artists, shelves of classic novels well worn from reading. "Did you know about any of this?" Christopher asked as we stood in what was clearly my mother's bedroom, looking at family photos arranged on a dresser. There we all were, Mark and Christopher as boys, me in my 30s, my parents on their anniversary. "Not a clue," I replied. "It's like she had a whole other life none of us knew about." Mark called us for lunch, and we ate on the deck, the mountain panorama spread before us. For a while we just talked about nothing important: Mark's job, Christopher's photography, my retirement plans. It felt almost normal, the 3 of us together without the tension that had characterized our rare family gatherings in recent years. At precisely 2 p.m., Mr. Peterson's car pulled up the driveway. He emerged carrying a briefcase, looking somewhat out of place in his formal attire against the rustic setting. "Gentlemen," he greeted us as he climbed the steps to the deck. "I'm pleased to see you all made it. Dorothy would be gratified." We moved inside to the living room, taking seats around the large coffee table. Mr. Peterson opened his briefcase and removed several folders and a small wooden box. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to explain that your mother, or grandmother in Mark and Christopher's case, was very specific about how this should proceed. Some of what I'm about to share may come as a surprise to you. He opened the first folder. First, regarding this property. The cabin and the 3 acres it sits on are bequeathed to you, Harold, with the provision that it never be sold out of the family. Your mother wanted this to remain a place where future generations could gather and reconnect. I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around owning a mountain retreat I hadn't known existed a week ago. Next, Mr. Peterson continued, are personal bequests. He turned to Mark. For Mark Davidson, your grandmother left this. He handed Mark an envelope. Mark opened it, pulled out a piece of paper, and stared at it with widening eyes. What is it? I asked. It's a deed, Mark said, his voice unsteady, to Grandma's house in town. She's left me her house. He looked up at the lawyer. Why would she do that? Mr. Peterson smiled slightly. Dorothy included a letter that might explain. He handed Mark another envelope, thicker than the first. While Mark read, Mr. Peterson turned to Christopher. For you, Christopher, your grandmother left 2 items. He passed Christopher a small, ancient-looking camera and another envelope. Christopher turned the camera over in his hands, examining it with obvious reverence. This is a Leica M3, he said, his voice hushed. From the 1950s. These are collector's items now. Where did Grandma get this? I believe her letter will explain, Mr. Peterson replied, gesturing to the envelope. Christopher opened it and began to read, his expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment. Mark finished his letter first, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. Did you know any of this, Dad? He asked me. Any of what? He hesitated, then passed me the letter. I read, My dear Mark, if you're reading this, then you've honored my last request, and I thank you for that. I'm leaving you my house because it was there, in that small building, that I learned my most important lessons about life and family. What you don't know, what your father doesn't know, is that when your grandfather and I bought that house, we could barely afford it. We worked 3 jobs between us. There were nights I went to bed hungry so you could have new school clothes or sports equipment when you visited. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because somewhere along the way, you began to measure success by salary and status rather than sacrifice and love. The house isn't worth much in dollars, but its value lies in what it represents, the choice to put family first. My hope is that you'll use it well, either as a place to reconnect with what matters, or to provide a start for someone who needs it, as we once did. With all my love, Grandma. I handed the letter back to Mark, who was staring out the window at the mountains. Christopher had finished his letter too, holding it against his chest as if protecting it. She knew, he said softly. Knew what? I asked. That I've been struggling. With my work, with believing in myself. He looked down at the camera in his lap. This camera belonged to her father, my great-grandfather. He was a photographer too, did you know that? During the Depression, documented the Dust Bowl. This was news to me. My mother had rarely spoken about her father, who died before I was born. Grandma writes that she's been following my work online. Christopher continued. She says I have his eye, that he would have been proud of me. His voice broke on the last words. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat gently. There's more, he said, picking up another folder. This concerns all 3 of you. We turned our attention back to the lawyer, who opened the folder and removed a stack of papers. What I'm about to reveal may be difficult to hear, he said, his tone turning more formal, but Dorothy insisted on complete transparency. He looked directly at me. Harold, your mother made a number of investments over her lifetime, very shrewd investments as it turns out. The cabin is just one small part of an estate that includes stock holdings, real estate investments, and several business interests. I blinked, struggling to process his words. What are you saying? My mother was wealthy. Quite wealthy, yes. Her estate is valued at approximately $8 million. The room went completely silent. I felt as though all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Mark sat up straighter, his consultant's brain visibly calculating. Christopher just looked stunned. "That's not possible," I finally managed. "Mom lived so simply. She darned socks, for God's sake. She saved leftover scraps of wrapping paper." "Those habits were deeply ingrained from her early years," Mr. Peterson explained. "But financially, Dorothy was extremely successful. She began investing small amounts in the 1970s, focusing on technology companies before most people recognized their potential. She bought Apple stock when it was first offered to the public. Same with Microsoft, Amazon, Google." He handed me a portfolio statement that confirmed everything he was saying. My mother, who had worked as a school librarian her entire career, was indeed a millionaire many times over. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, the question directed more to the universe than to Mr. Peterson. "That brings us to the final part of her will," the lawyer replied, his voice gentle but firm. He opened the wooden box that had been sitting on the table and removed an envelope sealed with wax. "Dorothy asked that I read this letter to the three of you together." He broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in my mother's handwriting. Then he began to read, "To my beloved son Harold and my dear grandsons Mark and Christopher, if you're hearing these words, then all three of you have honored my final request by coming together at the cabin. Thank you for that gift. Harold, you're wondering why I kept secrets from you, why I lived so modestly when I could have afforded luxury, why I never told you about the cabin or my investments or any of it. The answer is both simple and complicated. I wanted to see what you would all do without the expectation of reward. When your father died, Harold, I watched you call me every Sunday without fail. I saw you drive 8 hours to visit me twice a year, even though I knew those visits weren't always easy. You came not because you expected an inheritance, but because you believed it was right. Mark and Christopher, I watched you grow distant from your father after the divorce. I saw how rarely you called, how you missed birthdays and Father's Days. I saw your father's heart break a little more each time, and I saw none of you at my funeral." I gasped at those words. How could she have known? Mr. Peterson continued reading. "Yes, I knew you wouldn't come. Not because I'm psychic, but because I've been paying attention. We always show our true character in the small moments, the ones we think don't matter or that no one notices. I've made decisions about my estate based on what I've observed over these many years. The money isn't a reward or a punishment. It's a responsibility, a chance to become the men I know you can be. So here is what I've decided." Mr. Peterson continued reading my mother's letter, his voice steady and clear in the hushed room. "So here is what I've decided. The $8 million will be placed in a family trust, with specific conditions for its use. Harold, as trustee, you will receive an annual income of $250,000 for the remainder of your life. This is non-negotiable and begins immediately. For Mark and Christopher, access to their portions comes with conditions. Each of you will receive $100,000 immediately. The remainder of your inheritance, approximately $2.5 million each after taxes, will be held in trust for 1 year. During this year, you must visit your father at least twice a month. Real visits, not hurried coffees or business lunches. You must call him weekly. You must include him in holidays and important life events. At the end of that year, if these conditions have been met, as verified by the trustee I've appointed to monitor them, you will receive your full inheritance. If not, your portions will be donated to the Literacy Foundation I've established in our family name. I don't do this to control you from the grave. I do this because money without family is meaningless. I know because I had money and an absent family. It brought me no joy until I built this cabin and imagined you all here together. My dearest wish is that you use this year to rebuild what has been broken among you. No amount of money can replace the years already lost, but perhaps it can help you reclaim the years ahead. With all my love and hope for your future, Dorothy Davidson. When Mr. Peterson finished reading, none of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the distant call of birds outside. Mark stared at his hands, Christopher at the camera in his lap, and I gazed out at the mountains my mother had chosen as her secret refuge. "There are documents to sign," Mr. Peterson said finally, breaking the silence, "but perhaps you'd like a moment first." "Yes," I managed to say. "Thank you." The lawyer nodded and stepped outside onto the deck, leaving the three of us alone with my mother's revelations. "Did either of you have any idea?" I asked my sons. They both shook their heads. "She played us," Mark said, but there was no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of startled respect. "No," Christopher corrected him. "She loved us. Enough to try to fix us even after she was gone." Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't need her money. That's not why I'd—" "We know," I said quietly. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Mark asked, frustration edging into his voice. "Time," I said simply. "She's trying to buy us time together." Christopher nodded slowly. "A year of guaranteed family time, whether we want it or not." "And if we don't comply?" Mark asked. "We lose millions." I looked at my eldest son, so focused on the transaction. "Is that how you see it, as compliance?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "No, that's not what I meant. It's just, she's asking a lot. 2 visits a month, weekly phone calls." Christopher laughed softly. "That's not a lot, Mark. That's being a son." Mark was silent for a moment, then stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "You don't understand. My life is complicated. The hours I work, the travel. We all make time for what matters," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Your grandmother certainly did. Working multiple jobs, investing wisely, all while keeping her priorities straight." "Why didn't she just tell us?" Christopher asked. "About the money, about what she wanted from us." "Would you have listened?" I asked. "If she'd said, 'I'm wealthy, and I'll leave you millions if you're better to your father,' it would have felt like manipulation," Mark admitted. "Exactly," I said. "This way, she gets to see who you really are, who we all really are." Christopher turned the camera over in his hands. "I think I already know what I want to do." Mark and I both looked at him questioningly. "I'm going to fulfill her conditions," he continued. "Not for the money, but because she's right. We've been terrible sons." "Aye," he looked at me, his eyes sincere. "I'm sorry, Dad." The simple apology hit me like a physical blow. When was the last time either of my boys had apologized to me for anything? I couldn't remember. "I'm sorry, too," I said, "for whatever part I played in our distance." We both looked at Mark, who was still standing by the window. He turned, his expression unreadable. "You know why I couldn't make it to the funeral?" he said finally. "I was in a meeting about a promotion, vice president of the consulting division. It would mean another 100,000 a year, a corner office, more responsibility." He paused. "I got the promotion. The announcement went out yesterday." "Congratulations," I said, uncertain where this was going. But yesterday, sitting in my hotel room up here, I realized I had no one to call, no one who would really care. My girlfriend broke up with me last month, said I was never present even when I was physically there. My colleagues respect me but don't particularly like me. He looked at the papers Mr. Peterson had left on the table. And now my grandmother, who I didn't make time for when she was alive, is offering me millions to reconnect with the family I've been too busy for. Christopher stood up and walked over to his brother, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late. That's the whole point." Mark nodded slowly. "I know, and I don't need a year to decide. I'm in. For the first time in what felt like forever, I looked at my two sons standing together and felt something long dormant stirring in my chest. Hope. "Mr. Peterson can come back in now," I said. "I think we're ready to sign." The next hour was a blur of paperwork and legal explanations. By the time the lawyer left, the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. We stood on the deck together, watching the light change. "So what now?" Christopher asked. "Dinner," I said simply. "Mark was going to grill steaks, remember?" Mark laughed. "Is that all you've got, Dad? We just inherited millions and you're thinking about dinner?" I smiled at him. "One day at a time. That's how we rebuild." I paused. "Besides, your grandmother clearly had this all planned out for years. I think we can take an evening to just be together before we start making big decisions." As Mark fired up the grill and Christopher set the table, I stood watching them, these grown men who were my sons. They moved around each other with the awkward familiarity of people who share a history but have grown apart. This was my mother's real gift, I realized. Not the money, not the cabin, but this chance to reclaim what we'd lost. She had known exactly what she was doing, using her money not as a reward, but as a tool to reshape our broken family. I looked out at the mountains turning dark against the evening sky and whispered, "Thank you, Mom." The year that followed my mother's funeral transformed all of our lives in ways none of us could have predicted that day at the cabin. Mark was the first surprise. 2 weeks after our meeting with Mr. Peterson, he called to tell me he had resigned from his consulting position. "I turned down the vice presidency," he explained. "I'm starting my own firm. Smaller scale, more focused on clients I believe in. That's a big change," I said, concerned about the financial implications. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said, and I could hear the conviction in his voice. "I've been saving for years. With Grandma's initial distribution and my savings, I have enough to get started, and this way I control my schedule. I can prioritize family time without asking permission from anyone." True to his word, Mark not only met our mother's conditions, but exceeded them. Instead of twice monthly visits, he began coming to my house every Sunday for dinner. Sometimes he brought work with him, and we'd sit companionably in my living room, him with his laptop, me with my crossword puzzle. Christopher's transformation was more subtle but equally profound. He moved out of his cramped studio into a modest 2-bedroom apartment and converted the second bedroom into a proper dark room. Using his great-grandfather's Leica alongside his modern equipment, he began a photography project documenting family businesses in our city, the kind that had operated for generations, passing down not just livelihoods but values and connections. "It's about legacy," he explained when he showed me the first prints, "what we leave behind, what we carry forward." The brothers' relationship changed too. They began meeting for lunch every few weeks, sometimes inviting me along, sometimes not. I didn't mind either way. Seeing them rebuild their connection as brothers was another unexpected gift. As for me, the steady income from the trust allowed me to finally retire completely. I spent my newfound free time fixing up my mother's house, which Mark insisted I continue living in rather than him taking possession. "It's your home, Dad," he said. "I just wanted to make sure it stayed in the family, like Grandma wanted." 6 months into our year of mandated family togetherness, none of us was thinking about the money anymore. The weekly calls and regular visits had become routine, then welcome, then necessary parts of our lives. We spent Thanksgiving at the cabin, the 3 of us plus Mark's new girlfriend, a kindergarten teacher named Eliza, who clearly valued the person Mark was becoming over the executive he'd once tried to be. We cooked together, played board games, hiked the mountain trails. Christopher took photographs that captured moments I wanted to remember forever. Mark and Eliza laughing by the fireplace, me teaching them my mother's secret recipe for cranberry sauce. The 3 of us standing together on the deck at sunrise, coffee mugs in hand. At Christmas, we gathered at my house. Christopher brought a woman named Renee, whom he'd met while photographing her family's bakery. She taught us how to make proper French pastries, filling the kitchen with warmth and the scent of butter and sugar. By spring, the weekly check-ins required by my mother's will had evolved into daily texts and frequent spontaneous gatherings. The boys would drop by just to share good news or ask advice, or simply sit in comfortable silence while we watched baseball on television. The day before the one-year mark, Mr. Peterson called to remind us of the upcoming deadline. "I'll need to verify that the conditions have been met," he explained, "though from what I've observed, that won't be a problem." "Observed?" I asked. "Your mother arranged for me to check in periodically," he said. "Nothing intrusive, just confirmation of regular contact." I laughed. "Of course she did, always thorough, my mother." We agreed to meet at the cabin the following day, exactly 1 year after the reading of her will. It seemed fitting to come full circle, back to the place where our journey had begun. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "See you tomorrow, Dad, bringing the good wine." Then another from Christopher. "Heading up early to catch the sunrise. Want to join?" I texted back yes to both, marveling at how different these simple exchanges felt compared to the strained, infrequent communications of a year ago. The next morning, Christopher and I stood on the cabin's deck as the sun crested the mountains. The valley below was still cloaked in mist, creating the illusion that we were floating above the clouds. "I never understood why people got up early for this," he said, snapping photos. "Now I get it. Your grandmother loved sunrises," I told him. "She said they were proof that beginnings happen every day, not just once." He lowered his camera. "Do you think she knew how this would all turn out?" I considered the question. "I think she hoped. She was always the optimist in the family." Mark arrived mid-morning with Eliza and the promised wine. We spent a few hours just enjoying each other's company before Mr. Peterson's car appeared on the gravel drive. Unlike a year ago, there was no tension as we gathered in the living room. The lawyer smiled as he took in our relaxed postures and easy interactions. "I believe I can already determine that the conditions of Dorothy's will have been met," he said. "But for the record, I should ask, Harold, have your sons maintained regular contact with you as stipulated?" I looked at Mark and Christopher seated across from me. "They have, more than stipulated." "And would you say that the relationship between you has improved over this past year?" "Beyond recognition," I answered honestly. Mr. Peterson nodded, satisfied. "Then I am pleased to inform you, Mark and Christopher, that you have fulfilled the conditions set forth by your grandmother. The trust will release your full inheritances as specified in the will." The brothers exchanged glances. "Actually," Mark said, "we've been talking about that." "Oh?" Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "We'd like to make some changes to the distribution," Christopher explained, "if that's possible." The lawyer looked intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Mark leaned forward. "We'd like to establish a foundation, something to support family businesses, maybe literacy programs too, since those were important to Grandma." "We're thinking half of each of our inheritances," Christopher added. "The foundation would be in Grandma's name. And we'd like Dad to run it," Mark finished, "if he's willing." I stared at my sons, completely caught off guard. "Me? But I don't know anything about running a foundation." You know about family," Christopher said simply. "That's what it's really about." Mr. Peterson was smiling broadly now. "I think your grandmother would be very pleased with this proposal. I can have the paperwork drawn up within the week." After he left, the three of us sat in contemplative silence. Finally, I said what I'd been thinking all morning. "You know you don't have to do this. You've met her conditions. The money is yours free and clear. It's not about the conditions anymore, Dad," Mark said. Christopher nodded in agreement. This past year taught us what Grandma was trying to say. Money without family is meaningless. Besides, Mark added with a grin, we're keeping half. We're not complete idiots. We all laughed, and in that moment, I felt my mother's presence so strongly, it was as if she was sitting right there with us, satisfied with a plan well executed. As the day wore on, we talked about the foundation, about our lives, about the future. We cooked dinner together, opened Mark's good wine, toasted my mother's memory. Standing on the deck that evening, watching another sunset paint the mountains gold, I realized that my mother had given us something far more valuable than $8 million. She had given us each other. Again. And in the end, that was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the cabin with its spectacular views, but this. My sons beside me, our broken bonds mended, our family restored. Well played, Mom, I whispered to the mountains. Well played.